Come learn about Gemara. Today's Daf is Nun Aleph, and we're actually up to Nun Aleph on days, and we'll start from Boy Labacha, about 5 lines on top of the page, and we're talking about the idea of Galgalin. There's something else. We're talking about the Rekha. We're talking about the dust, the decomposed body, formed into dust, and if it's a certain, like a ladle full, then it Nazir goes has to start all over again if you come in contact with it. We said the idea of Galgala, which means it's something extraneous to this particular body, even another corpse got mixed up with this one. It's not considered anymore pure rekiv. Then we start talking about within the person itself, the one who passed away. If it's something we were asking questions here, what about, let's say, a fetus in the womb of the mother? Even on the one hand, it's part of the mother, on the other hand, it's about to leave the mother. Is it considered like two corpses next to each other and no rekiv or not? And we spoke about shich zera because it came from outside. And the last question we had was, what about excrement that's found inside a person? It's in the person, but do we say because it gives the person vitality? It's food. Without food, you're not there, so the food becomes part of you. Or do we say that since it's coming from external sources, it's not really part of you, and so on? Gemara continues questions, and we're going to ask them, then how in the world can you ever have rekiv? Parts of you're not even sure about whether it's considered as rekiv or not. How's a person ever have the din of rekiv?
Is rekiv the solid and tarvid is liquid? We use these two terms, rekiv and tarvid.
Same idea.
They dissolve liquid, and rekiv is the dust that's left at the end of this integration process.
Malloy tarvid is a ladle full, and rekiv is the composition, the dust, the decomposed dust.
So it doesn't matter really if it's moist or if it's dry. We're just talking about
we're just talking about what happens.
Whatever's left over.
Yeah, exactly. So think about it further. 4 lines on top of the page, 5 lines. We started this yesterday. What's the status of a person's skin? Not everyone learned that we're talking about oira here, but some of the learned that we're talking about oira. What is the status of oira? Because according to Rashi, oira does not mean skin at all. It means the saliva that a person has to force himself to spit out. Not that it's the tip of your tongue. It's something that you have to cough out. So on the one hand, do we say that since it's in your mouth now, it's eventually going to escape from your mouth, so it's called galgarin is outside or not? But the most of learn oira means literally the skin of a person. The skin of a person is not really on its own. It's not really generate tumor. So what happened? The skin is mixed into this rekiv. What about his saliva? What about his mucus? What does it say with phlegm? You're asking me a question. Perhaps all of these things, the saliva and all of these things we mentioned, the excrement and everything else, and the skin is not really considered part of the person, and therefore there's no longer rekiv. So how does a person ever have rekiv? Is rekiv no time? How do you ever have a case of rekiv? Because there's always something extraneous there. And asking mother, then in theory, when you have the rekiv mishkach, I'll tell you what, where all this is not there. For example, Dashkaya also has a question about here that's about to be cut off and all that. What's the status of that? Dashkaya made the column. The Gemara in Shabbos says there was a place there, a region that you had 2 palm trees, and right between the 2 palm trees you had a spring of water. And this spring of water is unbelievable. That if you drank only 1 cup from there, it cured you from any ailment or whatever. But if you drank a second cup, it caused you an unbelievable diarrhea, and it cleansed out, it purged everything from inside your body. And so you gave him the drink that made column, cleaned out the piercer, cleaned out everything that's inside your body. Then then you smeared yourself from this kind of a potion that completely removed any hair in your body. So that deals with the questions about hair is about to be removed. There's no hair left in your body. And then and then you boil the body in meitzveya and completely took away all the outer layers of the skin. So therefore, there's nothing extraneous left to this person's bodies. That's in theory how it's possible. If the result of these questions is that they are considered extraneous, and therefore there's no din of rekiv, so we'll say it's talking about a case where you went through this process and there's nothing there at all. Says the Gemara. We also have a rule: mace should tachne a corpse that was ground into dust. Ain't lay rekiv. There's no din of rekiv. because rekev is only if it's natural decomposition, not if you went ahead and you ground up the body. Okay, whatever you ground up the body, but then whatever you ground up, and then that itself decomposed further on its own. What happens? Media time. One ask a question, and this is how we explain the question. Look, we said before that the rekev has to have every part of your body. Elika, you have to have bus of flesh, gidim, and the veins, and the sinews, vatsamas, and the bones. Well, Ika, you have that. Okay, first manually you did it, and then it went further. Oh, Dilma, perhaps kibriyase beinan. We need that to start decomposing and turn it, transform it to rekev from its original state. You already intervened in between, and you yourself turned it into dust. They put it on the rekev. Tani Ula Bachanin and Mace Shechasa, if you have a person who passed away and was buried missing minus a limb, and then it decomposes and turns into dust, ain't lay rekev. There's no din of rekev. There's no din of rekev. And some of these things are because Allah, as Rosh points out clearly and says is not 100% sure. It's halacha mashur sinai. Because halacha mashur sinai, that didn't, whether we understand them or not, that for whatever reason, that's how it is. Okay, so if it's minus a limb, there's no rekev. Nor does it have the din of tfus. If you find a dead body lying somewhere, you want to transfer it to somewhere else. Once you want to transfer it to his family, to throw whatever it is, you have to take the sand that's all around it. But there's no din of tfus here if the body is missing a minus a limb. And you take what you do is you take the sand all around the body, go up to the width of 3 fingers, because we say that part of the body soiled the sand that's immediately around it. Nor is there vishchunas kavras. We're going to learn later on if you find 3 bodies within a certain distance of each other, between 4 and 20 amos of each other, we say, oh, it might be a cemetery, and you have to continue searching to see whether any other bodies. But this is, so if you have 2 bodies that are intact and 1 body that's missing a limb, it's not considered a cemetery. You don't have to continue looking anywhere further. And Tesa said the only possible logic here is, he says, I don't know. What do I care if a limb is missing? If 3 people bodies are buried within a certain distance of each other, and that forms a cemetery, then if missing a hand, an amputee, so what? So Tesa said, if you're going to tell me it's Allah Sinai, then fine. But Tesa is not convinced 100% that it's Allah Sinai. The Rosh says clearly it's Allah Sinai. That's you can ask these questions. Okay, so Meisrei. Makes the question. It says it talks about it there. If you have a limb, an aver l'chai, if somebody was alive and lost an aver, and that aver itself, does that generate tumah not? There's an opinion that says that it's tar because the person's still alive, so the limb that was the detached from the person does not generate tumah. There's another opinion that says it does, and the one that says it does is you're learning out from if the limb would have left a person when the person died, it would have generated tumah on its own. So now that the person is alive, so what? But the limb is on its own, is no longer alive, separated from the living person, and therefore generates tumah. And so Gemara over there says, how can you compare the two? Maybe a mace, because there's so many chumras, even its limb also generates tumah. Says Gemara, no, imam have been mace. No, by mace, if you cut the aver off, it still generates tumah because it has all these dinim. She has like din of raiv. It has the din of raiv, and most of the skeleton is there, most of the limbs are there intact. It's considered a full body, and it has a din of a raiva. We learned before that there's a quarter of a calf of bones that generates tumah. By malay tarvud, or it has a din of the malay tarvud, a ladle full of the rekev of this the decomposed dust, that is what's matame boil. Tell me by a living person, doesn't have any of these in it. Now, yeah, that's what it says over there. If we're talking about a case where the limb is missing, what do we tell that the original mess over here has a rekev? You just said there's missing a limb, there's no rekev. It's tabulating over here all the chumras by a mace in the case of l'chayda missing a limb, and it includes a rekev. You just said that if it's missing a limb, Ula said there's no rekev. That's clearly there is. What are we talking about here? We're talking about a living person that lost 1 limb, and the kavaz got mess, and we contrast them with a person who dies that we're missing a limb, and that limb is tummy. We see clearly that what the mace, the origin of that missing limb, is still generates a tumah of rekev of dust. So who said we're talking about that mace? You think we're comparing that mace missing a limb to the chai missing a limb? No, we're talking about mace in general. So mace in general, the concept of a mace is more strict by a mace generally if its body's intact. There's a record. By a living person, there's never been a record. Miktani, how mace, this dead, this corpse, how commercial on shoe mace, yes, the record. Generally, in algemeen, that people who pass away, if they decompose, there's a din of record. Shum chayin record, but there's no living creation, a person that has a din of record while they're still alive. Second, boy, Rabbi, that's another question. What happens? Hirkiv, Kishuchai, let's say the limb turned into rekev while he was alive, the chaz of a mace, and then the person died. What happens to that rekev?
Went back anyway.
Yeah, fair enough. Do we say kigmiri? Do we say kigmiri rekev? When do we say that this dust, the irkiv kishamesa, had to happen while the person was dead already? Otherwise, if it happened while alive, there's no din rekev. That shot. Or it has to be a mice. Or you can argue, but right now that person is dead, and right now we look at that the dust that originally came from that person. Well, now the din should be that it generates two. Tashma, we'll go back to the same source we just did a minute ago, and we say you want to compare a living amputated limb to a person who died, a corpse missing a limb. Well, you know, Imam the mace. You know why by mace generally everything is stricter. Therefore, the limb also is stricter. She yes, it has all these laws. The majority of the skeleton, over the limbs, over there's a quarter of a cab of bones. The rekibor, a slate full of dust. They're all also therefore we're machlik. On the other hand, a living person doesn't have any of these didn't. The time, the whole reason is Mishum Chai. Cole's the way we're understanding is we're comparing this person's alive to this person's dead. Okay, Coleman, this person's alive. There's no din of record. Homemade, but this very same person died and he did have some dust from his decomposed, let's say, limb, and now the person's dead. It should be a yes, wait, says Gemara again. Again, Gemara is learning that talking about this person. Miktani homemade. We're talking about this person if he dies. How commercial on the shoe mace yesterday back. We're talking about generally people who pass away. There's in a record. Shum chay ain't a record, but no living person has in a record. Okay, boy, Rav asked the question. The thing is, if you eat an ant, normally we say there's a certain share how much you have to eat by tray for kazayas. We say if you eat a berry, if you eat an entire creature, then even if it's smaller, up to the size of a lentil, you are high. Yeah. So what about an ant, which is even smaller than that? What happened to the mola, an ant, missing its legs, an amputee, but it can still live. An ant with minus legs can still live. Mahu. What would the din be then? What's the din then? Because generally we say that the Gemara says the mark is that if you ate an ant, no matter how small, no matter what size, it can be microscopic, you committed a sin because it's somebody's trade and it's a full creature. Now, what happens if it's minus its legs? But it can still live. Is it still called a berry or not? Meat mao. Do we say shiura gemida? We need a full intact animal. When we say like a berry, we're talking about size, measures, missing its leg. It's not really a berry. Well, chaser, a gilma, perhaps berry gemida. We're talking about a creature that can continue to live, and this is it continue to live. Well, equally, you have it. All right, this is the Toshba coming here. It says in Pasuk the following. We're talking about a shrutzim. There are 8 shrutzim listed in the Torah, like lizards and all that. And as lizards are told that they generate tumor compared to all other rodents and creepy crawlies. So these shrutzim, it says in Pasuk, kol hanageya bohem. If you touch in them while they're dead, you become tummy. What kind of expression is bohem? Toshba coming here. It says, bohem, yochel, I would have thought, but the kulon, I would have thought that you have to touch the entire, and whatever the creature is, the entire creature. It says in another pasuk, and if it falls, any part of them, mayhem falls in, it causes tumor inside a utensil, in a vessel. It says mayhem, I mean, you don't need all of it, even just part of it. So how can you have bohem and mayhem at the same time? Yochel, says bohem. Has to be all of it. Okay, so how can it be bohem and mayhem? And we say that what? That it have to touch part of it that's considered as if it's all of it, as if the entire animal, even though it's not all of it there. The Chacham says, what is it? When do we say that you touch part of a sheretz, but it's like the entire sheretz is there? The Kadosh, we say the size of a lentil. That if it's the size of a lentil, you become tummy. Why is the size of a lentil? Interesting, the Gemara says here, why taka the size of a lentil where you had it before, is matame ready. When you have this little lizard, something like a lizard, because that's life begins the size of a lentil. Oh God. And therefore, it makes sense that that's the minimum size the Mikos Tula. So we see from here that you need, it's talking about size, which we're not saying because the berry, we're saying because that's the full animal. So you need a full animal because the full animal is the size of a lentil. It means you need the legs as well. Without the legs, it's no longer generate this ant minus the legs. It's not generating from it.
Is that what it was?
That's one of the things. Yeah.
I thought it was kadosha means it doesn't matter what it is as long as you got that size.
No, there's a reason why it's lentil because that's the beginning of life. The beginning of life is when it's intact. That's one of the things right now. Because when we say that the size of this little lizard starts out of lentil, we're talking about the full thing, including its legs, including every part of it, including its little antennas, every part of it. So, because if you cut its legs off, it'll be smaller than a lentil and still be alive. And yet we say no, the minimum size for this particular creature is a lentil, which shows that it has to be the full creature, whatever the creature is. So that's the chayden. Your question before, minus the leg, you know, could live. It's not. Says the Gemara, no, keeping and the loy have a kadosh, the loy metame, the loy naflo ben neshama. By no, over there we're talking about its life begins the size of a lentil. Anything if it be a little smaller size of a lentil, it's not alive yet. So that's called a berry, not because you need the legs, everything else. That's just the way it is. Its life begins when it's the size of a lentil. If the thing's already alive, like the case of the ant, it was alive already. And then even though you like the bailach, if you cut the legs or minds the legs, it still live. So maybe it's still generate tumor. And that's why we have no resolution. Okay, the Mishnah said Hashedra, the spine, Gogoilis, the skull, they also generate tumor enough that a Nazir, if he walks into the oil or any of these things, he has to restart his own Naziris. Iboyilu, have a question. Shedra, what it says in the Mishnah, Shedra the Gogoilis. It says in the Mishnah, Allah Shedra the Allah Gogoilis. I'm the spine and I'm the skull. I mean, you need both of them inside the room in order to generate tumor. Maybe it means either the spine or the skull is in the room, then they become tummy, and therefore Nazir has to restart. Which one is it? So the Gemara, we learned Shedra, you have a spine, and you broke most of the ribs coming out of the spine, most of the vertebrae from the spine. It is toy. Because it's not really a proper spine because it's missing most of the vertebrae. Talking about they're an animal that becomes safe. But inside the cave, even though once it's buried, the entire spine, and then they fall off the vertebrae. Either they get broken and correctly, just sever their connections. To me, it's tabe. Because the cave keeps them all together. And that's halacha medicina. Time the whole it sounds from here all we have is the spine. We don't have a skull here, and yet we're saying that inside the cave, the spine on its own generates tumor. Your question was the spine. Do you need also the skull? It says clearly only the spine. But let's say that if it wouldn't have been separated, it would be tummy. But what we kind of glean from here is it's the spine on its own we're talking about. There's no skull. Says the Gemara. Who said that's shot at all? Like Tani doesn't say clearly, but the spine on its own. It doesn't say clearly that if it's separated from the skull, it's clear enough. This is what he's saying here. If the vertebrae broke off, it's definitely tar. If the vertebrae is still there and it's there without the gogoilis, that's my question. I'm not telling you for sure that the other way it's tar. I'm just saying this is definitely not tar. But if you have the gogoilis, this shedra without the gogoilis, that's my question. Is it generally tumor not? We haven't resolved it yet. Toshmar, that's coming here. Rabbi Yehuda says she should learn the 6 things that Rabbi Akiva metame, the Chachamim metame. There were 6 cases Rabbi Akiva was metame, and and the Chachami were Matayr. And Rabbi Akiva then later on Rabbi Akiva changed his mind and he agreed with the Chacham. Umayse, there's a story. Shehevi a kupa, Malaya at Summers Lebeis HaKnesset. They brought a whole box full of bones to the shul. Shel Tarsim, from people who melt down copper. They placed it in the ear space, and there was no roof over it, so it didn't pass the tumor around the room because it was just went straight to Shemayim. And they wanted someone to come in and what do you go? To see whether it's right minion or right binion, so this will be mitame, these bones will be mitame. The nichne, these bones. The nichne is toidas areif. We have a number of times. This famous doctor, all the doctors came with him. But they said, and they were arguing at this very point: if you have a skull and a spine coming from two different masons, do they join together or not? We don't have a sheder, a spine from one mace. We can tell from the bones it's two different skeletons. So the more of time, so the argument has to be from one scale of one person or two. Not about blood, they argue from one person or two. Time, the only problem was like a sheder. What do you call it? The problem was that the spine came from two people. Vice versa, the spine came from one person. Even though there was no skull, it still generate tumor. What would have been if it would have been, let's say, the spine of only one person? It would have generated tumor. So that resolves your question. Does not bring a proof to your question you asked before. No. Toydus said, no, I don't have to mention you. First of all, he says, I don't have a shed and a gagalus. He just want to go further. Says, not, first of all, I don't have a skull. And even if and Nachmer, one mace is two mason. Okay. We'll stop here. We'll continue.